Hey everybody, welcome to room 301. I'm Vaz, I'm with the FinOps Foundation, and if you're interested in learning about the intersection of FinOps and sustainability, Mark has a great talk queued up for y'all. So I'm excited to hear from him, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I'll say is it has just been pointed out that I'm a gigantic hypocrite when it comes to sustainability, because I'm not even being sustainable in the name of my talk, because I'm duplicating the words in it. Ooh.
That was a good joke. For the record, it was
I can't use the technology, can I either? Yeah. So I'm Mark Butcher from Posetiv in the UK, and 2 years ago we were very focused on FinOps and DevOps, and I took the monumentally stupid decision, as I was told at the time, to completely change our direction and to really double down into a new area that I saw developing, which was all linked to sustainability. It wasn't called GreenOps at the time, but it's rapidly becoming that. And it's something that personally I'm very passionate about, and it's now linked very much into my working life. And if you take nothing else away from today, absolutely nothing else today, all you've got to think about is that you can actually have a positive impact. Working within FinOps, you actually have the ability to make a monumentally positive impact on how your organization's impact on the environment. So the agenda. There's quite a lot I'm covering, so I may go a little bit too quickly. If I am talking too fast, just tell me to slow down. I'm going to cover the sustainability working group we've got within the foundation. I also want to cover, why actually do people care about this right now? Why is it suddenly becoming such a big thing? But also then, what does it mean from kind of a cloud perspective? And why FinOps and GreenOps? Where is the link? Is there a link? And importantly, probably the most controversial bit is what are the hyperscalers doing around it? And finally finishing off with something that's a bit more practical, showing where we can go with now. So what can we tangibly do as an outcome of this? So we have a working group in the foundation, and it's a fantastic one. And what I've got to say, it's definitely the best one, without any doubt whatsoever, so you have to join it. I'm not biased in the slightest just because I'm one of the people helping to run it. We've got a really good team, a blend of experience, all levels of experience and capability. It's coming with people, from end users, from consultants, from the vendors themselves. Working together to try and do something that's really tangible. And we're working in a whole series of sprints. And in our first sprint, we wanted to do something like to take a very simple, nice start, which was to create a vision, work out what problem was it we were trying to solve? What was it? How are we going to do it? And also to identify very clearly what is the intersect between GreenOps and FinOps, and did it even exist, or were we just making it up as we went along? And to do something tangible in the first instance, to get people bought into wanting to work with us more on it, was to create something that people could use, so some standardized remediations from a GreenOps perspective. And obviously, and really simply, define the next deliverables for the following sprint so we actually had a plan. We knew what we were doing. And the clicker's broken. No, it hasn't there yet. So our vision, I'm not going to read through it, but really simply, it's to bring some clarity. More than anything else, and it's to create an overarching framework and to create some tangible deliverables that really give a measurable impact. So something that people can use practically, that adds value, that can work within their organizations to help people reduce the impact of their cloud services. So let's go backwards. Why is it that companies care about this in the first place? And it is really simple, right? So suddenly, CEOs are actually getting actively involved in this rather than just asking HR to create a brochure and publishing it. And the reason they care about this is a multitude of reasons. But the first one is you've got investors and shareholders are starting to put huge amounts of pressure onto companies to be more sustainable, to be more ethical. And you've got investment companies, even some of the harshest ones like BlackRock, are actually noticing that they're getting a greater return on their investments when they invest in sustainable companies. So suddenly there's more money to be made out of companies that are sustainable. So it's positively impacting the share price if you are a more sustainable organization. Then you've got legislation. So governments are really showing their teeth now. Bodies are showing their teeth. They're coming down with really harsh standards and measurements and things that people actually have to report on, and they actually have to be accurate now rather than just making it up as they go along. And there's another one which you shouldn't forget about, which is, everyone's seeing the impact of what's being called the Great Resignation. So employees basically having more choice. There's more jobs than there are people right now to fill the jobs. And you've got employees care about this kind of thing, and particularly the new generation coming through into positions of power in organizations. They're making their decisions on who they go and work for based upon their own ethics. So things like climate change matter to them, and they don't want to work for organizations that aren't doing the right thing. And the last one, which is mostly linked right back to revenue, which is what all companies really care about, which is the customer buying decisions. So customers are now buying from brands that reflect their needs and wants. So brands that are seen to be doing the ethically right thing, seen to be sustainable. So when you think about it from your perspective, your companies need to be doing this if they want to be successful in the new world, because customers won't buy from brands that aren't doing it. And all this is boiling right back down to CEOs, and this is a really critical bit. Increasingly, CEOs are getting bonused and paid based upon meeting sustainability targets. And there's nothing that gets projects funded better than a CEO getting paid on it. Funding comes spiraling downhill really, really fast for these kind of projects. So ESG is a word that gets bandied around, and it's more than just sustainability, obviously. So sustainability fits into the E, the environmental piece. It's also the greenhouse gas emissions, but don't forget the S and the G, because this is how you're also being judged. It's a social and governance. So you need to be looking at your supply chains and working out, are the suppliers that you're choosing, do they meet your criteria? Do they align well with you? So you shouldn't forget about it, but today we're talking from a sustainability perspective. That's all wrapped into mostly into the E. And the complete FUD that really, really annoys me, so the cloud providers love to come out and say, we are the most sustainable things in the planet. We are the most environmentally friendly. Our services are 20 times more efficient than any other data center you've ever been in. And they always choose the ugliest, horrible, nastiest data center to compare against, the most inefficient, horribly run, bad organization. It's not really a fair comparison, but to be fair to them, they are investing heavily in newer technologies, but they're obsessing too much about the power side of it generally, in my opinion. And why do they do this? Well, it's kind of because they care, but also it's because it directly impacts their bottom line. For them, being efficient isn't necessarily about the environment. It's about driving down their costs so they can make more profit, as simple as that. But they do have massively efficient data centers. They do buy the leanest infrastructure they possibly can. They do run services as tight as they can. But that's only the sustainability of the cloud. And the bit that everyone forgets about, which is hence why it's so closely linked to the world of FinOps, is the sustainability in the cloud. So this is your context. This is the services you're building and running. This is the efficiency of those services. This is having the right kind of, and you might notice this all aligns very, very well with the FinOps context. So you've got things like optimizing your cloud consumption. You've got implementing targets for measuring carbon reduction. This is things like the efficiency of your code. It's just looking at it through a subtly different lens. So emissions and sustainability. You might have heard scope 1 and 2 and 3 mentioned quite a lot. Most people don't really understand the impact of what they are and how they're measured and why they're measured. So this is all written from the context of a cloud provider. This isn't the general. So a cloud provider, for them, scope 1 and 2, effectively it's the power and cooling. It's the diesel generators. It's the electricity that they're consuming. And then there's scope 3, which effectively is the everything else. So scope 3 is their entire supply chain. It's the data centers, it's the servers, it's the storage, it's the network switches, it's the transportation of everything. It all scales up and wraps all the way up, right through from kind of the sand being dug out the ground, effectively. It all rolls up. And this, okay. Give me a click, please. So from your context as a consumer, your cloud consumption is your scope 3. So it's a scope 3 emission. But how it all rolls up, this is a really important bit. So if you look at it going all the way back to the raw materials being sucked out of the ground, they're scope 1 and 2 from the raw material manufacturer. That rolls into the scope 3 of the processing of the materials. And that all rolls up into the manufacturing of it, which all rolls up into the cloud provider services, which then goes into yours. And the reason this is really important is that for a very, very long time, the cloud providers have only been talking about scope 1 and 2. They've been completely ignoring scope 3. And the reason, and this is true in most industries, but scope 3 is really hard to calculate, allegedly, particularly if you don't ask the questions of your supply chain, which I'm mildly suspicious that some of them haven't been doing. And scope 3, can you give me a... So it's way, way, way bigger than you'd think it is. So Microsoft have actually done a pretty good study, and because they've actually looked at theirs to work out what they are, and it's about 80%. So if a cloud provider is only talking about scope 1 and 2, they're ignoring 80% of the emissions. And most of the hyperscalers and cloud providers in general have not been tracking at all. They just haven't been doing it. And what it means is you've got no visibility of this. You can't see it. And also it means that for you, reporting on your waste is then really, really hard, because if you're only getting what's effectively is scope 1 and 2 figures, if you're reporting that upwards as part of your ESG reporting, you're massively out in terms of accuracy of the figures that you're using. And so, and this isn't unusual and focused just on the kind of the IT sector. In IT in general, it's very, very high. There are sectors where actually scope 3 is much higher. So if you go into, say, the garment industry, so the clothing industry, for that sector, scope 3 is 98% of their overall emissions. So it's not like it's solely within the boundaries of IT. But what is solely within the boundaries of IT is the inability to accurately measure it. And IT for sustainability folk outside of IT has been a really grey area, and no one's bothered looking at it because no one realised the size and the scale. And if you've read anything about sustainability over the last few years, you will have seen everyone always talking purely about power, about cooling, about efficiency in data centres, totally ignoring the elephant in the room, which was the everything else. Because if you're making your data centre more efficient, that's great, but you're only moving the lever a tiny amount. You can make a hugely bigger impact by focusing on the broader part of it. But to do that, you need the metrics and the data. And this is where you get into the intersect of FinOps and GreenOps. So GreenOps for a FinOps professional is a gigantic lever that you can use within your organization to have a really positive impact. But the problem is, at the moment, these are mostly kind of unknown and completely untracked and really difficult to actually quantify in an accurate manner. And cloud waste, purely and simply, directly, tangibly links into higher carbon emissions. And FinOps as a practice is absolutely, completely the key to unlocking the savings in the cloud from a carbon perspective. And the nice thing is, if you want to make friends with other departments and other areas of your business, if you're saving millions of dollars through doing this, that money can be used to fund other sustainability initiatives in your business. So it's actually a real positive engagement, because it's not a cost center, it's actually a profit center effectively, because you're returning money back into the organization. And if nothing else, sustainability gives you a conversation to have with people who might not care about the dollars. Because something that we've heard in all the other work group sessions that I've been to is everyone talking about how do you influence engineers to make change? Because loads of engineers, you go to them and say, you need to save $5 million. They go, oh, I don't care, it's not my problem. I'm here to deliver products, to deliver features, to deliver on the roadmap. They don't care about it. And also a lot of them are contractors and consultants anyway, paid a day rate, so why do they care about saving money for the organization? And they don't have time. But if you put it in the context of sustainability and the climate, people generally have a personal interest in this. And also it gives you the ability to have the conversation outside of the boundaries of IT as well. So you can talk to line of business, you can talk to people about the applications and data sets. And I have a really good example story, which I think we're going to cover tomorrow in the Chalk Talk session. But effectively, without spoiling the entire story, by working with the line of business, we managed to reduce the emissions and the footprint of the platform by 98%. That's 98%, not anything like that, by focusing on sustainability with the business, because it fundamentally shifted how their application functioned and the service that they delivered back to their end users. So cloud waste from a GreenOps perspective. It's all the usual FinOps areas. There's nothing unusual. So it is, it's oversized compute, it's right sizing, it's inefficiently tiered storage, it's wasted storage, it's connectivity problems, it's looking at the sizing of serverless functions, microservices, that kind of thing. But also it goes into things like application development processes. It's looking at ways that applications and services are being designed, built, and delivered. It's looking at things like code libraries, code bloat. As I said, it's looking at operational processes. It's looking at your standards. And importantly as well, it's directly linked into your strategy and your procurement processes, because procurement has a horrible part to play in actually bloating your carbon footprint with services, particularly if you've ever kind of worked in the public sector. The usual story, they make gigantic commitments for reserved instances and savings plans, and they think they're doing the right thing because they get a better discount. But working in the public sector, there is a tendency, obviously, if you don't spend it, you'll lose it. So they make these huge commitments, and boy, will they use it. They will spend every single penny. And that isn't exactly going with the ethos of sustainability, because they're going to go, right, if I've got $5 million to spend, I'm going to spend every single penny of that, and I'm going to do it as fast as I can, because I might not get it next year. If I don't spend it now, I might not get it. And that goes directly against it, and that's a huge part to play. And then linking into your strategy as well. So strategically, how do you develop services? How do you integrate them with the business? So these figures came from Gartner. So this is kind of the global cloud waste, and this is just for classic infrastructure as a service. So this is not the entire aspect of all cloud spend. So it works on an average of about 30%. But so this is only about the $80 billion total spends. But you're looking at about $26.6 billion of cloud waste. That's a huge amount of money. But the important thing is, what does it actually mean? What does it actually boil down to? And it is, it's all the areas like, non-production services still running, it's oversized things, it's wasted storage, it's that lovely one which is the idle resources, it's development environments being left on overnight and at weekends when they're not actually needed or not being worked on. It's just, the overspend on things, it's unattached resources. Oh. No, I didn't do that. Go back all the way back through. I'm going to put this down. Yeah, one more. So it's effectively, just on that $26 billion, it's somewhere between 4 to 6 million tons of carbon, just wasted completely. So give me a click. So that is 7.4 million acres of forests. It's 15.4 billion miles driven. And it's 102 million trees that have grown over 10 years. And that's only that small proportion. So if you think of the figures that were shared earlier in some of the keynotes, where we're talking about potentially cloud spend going towards the trillions, we're only talking about 76 billion of it. So you can multiply those figures by a factor of 20 or more, and that's when you're going to see how much carbon waste that's being generated unless we as practitioners do something about it and make our services more efficient. And that's why it's about what every person can do. It's all the little things that we can do that have a positive impact when you roll them all up. So hopefully what you've seen from this is that there's a gigantic intersect between FinOps and GreenOps, because GreenOps is just FinOps through a different lens. It's a different metric, it's different data. And they do mutually support each other very, very well. And there's the areas where they don't intersect well, and I gave that example, which is the whole overuse of savings plans and reserved instances. That is, whilst it might make savings from a FinOps perspective, that's very anti-GreenOps. But the intersect in the middle is huge. It's all the classic FinOps areas without any doubt. And so if you're actually doing FinOps, you're already delivering on GreenOps. You're just maybe not measuring it, and you're not having the conversation in the right way with your organization. But there's a measurement challenge, and this is a horrible bit. So there's no nice way of saying it. Cloud vendor capability is bloody awful. I was told that I'm allowed to be fairly controversial if I want to, and I'm going to try and tone it down a little bit because they really have been annoying me. There's a real lack of granularity. There's the big problem, which is the vendors themselves aren't including all the emissions in their calculations, but they're going out there aggressively to the market, all of them claiming to be the most sustainable, wonderful organizations in the world and sharing carbon figures and telling everyone, here's our new dashboard, isn't it wonderful? But actually, their reporting capability right now is really, really basic. It's fairly nasty, and they've got a real limited ability to actually do anything with the data they're giving you. So not only is the data kind of wrong in the first place, but they don't give you the ability to do much with it, and you can't guarantee its accuracy. And the bit that is a real opportunity, and having spoken to a lot of the tooling vendors who are here, and I've been talking to all of them on the same subject, none of them have really jumped on board to actually deliver any capability in this area yet. They're all starting and talking about it, saying, it's all, we're looking at this Q3 next year, Q4 next year. And I kind of get why, but I would like to see us as an industry putting pressure on the hyperscalers and the tooling vendors to give us the capability that's needed so that we can actually measure accurately and do remediation from a GreenOps perspective. So this is what I mean by it. So if you look at this, so let's pick the big three. So if you're a large enterprise user of cloud services and you've got a hybrid multi-cloud environment, and your ESG team have asked you for your carbon footprint calculations, right now there's no nice way of saying it, you're completely buggered, short of making estimates. So AWS, their lovely carbon tool that they've released only focuses on scope 1 and 2. The carbon data that they use is 3 months old for the carbon intensity of the electricity, so it's not up to date. The calculation period is monthly, and it's all based upon averages. And in terms of granularity, they give you EC2, storage, and other, without telling you what's in the other and what's excluded whatsoever. So there's no way of knowing, when you're using your services, what's in there, what isn't in there, and what's missing. And the geographic breakdown is only at a country-based level in terms of the calculation itself. So even within a country, you couldn't pick which one of the regions to have an accurate figure there. And it's all at an account level. So if you've got a really complicated environment, you're kind of a little bit screwed. Microsoft actually are doing a bit better. So in terms of people, they've put, I think it's about 200 people within Microsoft who are focused on this now, and they have gone to the effort of calculating their Scope 3 emissions. So they've got 87% coverage is what they claim. I think the true figure is probably a little lower, but they've got 87% of their Scope 3 emissions. They say accurately calculated and mapped, and so that means their entire supply chain they've gone to and got their emissions calculations, and that's now what they're releasing. But they're still using month-old carbon data. But their calculation period is hourly, and they cover all their services, including M365. And they do give fairly detailed at a product level, but they're still giving it all the averages. So because it's an average, you couldn't right now accurately compare which instance within Microsoft is more carbon efficient than another instance at all. It's all based upon the average utilization. And they give a geographic breakdown from a regional perspective. And then Google are in many ways kind of worse than what Amazon are doing, but a little bit better in others. So Google with their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, it's like deciphering a foreign language from 5,000 years ago, trying to work out what they're covering and what they're not covering. They definitely don't do Scope 3, and they don't include all of Scope 1 and 2. They include parts of it, and there's some very weasel words that they use in their documents which describe what's excluded. But their carbon calculation is hourly. So, give them that as a win. They're doing very accurate carbon calculation data. But the calculation period is monthly, but they only cover 80 services. But it doesn't strongly define which ones are or aren't included. But it's a detailed breakdown. So you can see here, if you went to those three providers, Amazon might tell you that your carbon footprint, say, was 100 tons, and Microsoft might tell you your carbon footprint is 700 tons, and that's exactly the same figure once you factor in what they're missing. But you couldn't actually work within any aspect of accuracy as to which one of my services, which region's better. You couldn't make any decisions to say, I want to place my workloads in the US or in Sweden or because you don't have that level of intelligence and information. And because it's all based on averages, you don't know at all whether it's factual or not. So to bring it back to something a bit more positive, we thought within the working group we would actually create some things that were actually, you could actually tangibly take away and do something with. So what we've created is a 38-point framework, or a fancy way of saying it's a list of things that you can do. We've broken it down into the kind of the crawl, walk, and run phases, so you can see what you can do at different levels of maturity. Because this is actually really important for sustainability, just like with FinOps, is that there are certain things that you shouldn't try doing until you're at a more mature level. Because otherwise, you won't be able to implement the changes, and it won't work, and it won't stick at all. So, and it's things that you can start today, and it's things that you are probably already doing. You just didn't know you're doing it, but it gives you, again, the ability to have that conversation outside of IT. So these are the areas. So it is things like, it's looking at areas from the compute, networking, operations, serverless, and many others. Looking at what you can be doing, where you can be focusing, and what is the size and scale of the impact. And obviously, the potential impact when we say high, medium, and low, we are taking some broad sweeping assumptions, and every organization clearly is very, very different in what the actual impact it will have. And we're looking at how and where you should be putting it through. So you look down at this, these are all things that actually are very common FinOps practices. None of this is particularly new or exciting. And then we get into things like looking at things like the software, storage and data protection, and also looking at things like your overarching strategy as well. And so working outside of just the kind of the cloud ops area, working with your software teams, looking at their development practices. So it's what's next? So we have fairly ambitious ideas for the working group and what we want to do. We see this as being a very long-running iterative process where we're going to keep going, keep coming up with new deliverables. We want to create an overarching framework. We're looking at creating more standardized content and training because people need training on this subject because not many people even understand things like the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, let alone the rest of the complexities that come with it. We want to create a maturity assessment so that organizations can actually see from an overarching ESG perspective where actually are they in terms of maturity so that they can work out where to start and how to start rather than trying to run before you can even crawl. Making some standardized KPIs and targets areas, and as you saw there, the standardized remediation list. And this is a really important thing. I want to use the power of the community, so the 5,500 companies that are members of the foundation, to be driving back into the vendors. Because at the moment, it's a very top-down approach from the vendors. They're effectively delivering the capability that they think they can deliver in a way that they want to deliver it in a way that suits them. I want us to be doing the reverse, which is pushing back up and saying, this is actually what we need as organizations. This is what we want. And a lot of it does actually come down to, in a real simple term, data. Because at the moment, you just don't have the data, so you can't make the decisions to actually do any of the stuff that's listed here. And then we're also looking at things like standardized content libraries, so there's things that you can use, reuse, and repurpose. And the community integration piece. So we're a small working group. We've got limited resources. And what I'm finding is, so I belong to a multitude of other industry working groups from other areas of the industry, whether it's data centers, platforms. I'm working directly with some of the biggest vendors, so people like Dell who are very interested in this kind of thing from a platform perspective. And what I'm finding is that all these little pockets, everyone's reinventing the same wheel. We're all moaning about the same thing, which is lack of resource, lack of time, lack of money to do things. And everyone's reinventing it in their own little way, doing their own thing. And so what I want to do is to integrate it and bring it together from a community perspective, because this is for the greater good for the planet, obviously. Get everyone doing things in a very common way, because one of the things that's coming is, and this has been covered in some of the other sessions, the unit economics part of it is going to be hugely important from a FinOps perspective for GreenOps. And what I mean by that is at the moment, we're all struggling even to calculate the baseline, what are my actual total emissions? What's coming next? So I was with a bank a couple of weeks ago, and they're trying to get to the point where they've got the unit economics for carbon per unit of transaction for their customer experience. So they've got individual, high net worth individual customers coming to them and saying, I want to know the carbon footprint of my experience with you. And they've been asked to do that across every aspect of their business. And imagine trying to do that right now with the data and the information you've got from a cloud perspective. It's beyond impossible. So not only are we facing the challenge of baselining it with what we've got, there's a gigantic leap to get to where we need to get to, which brings together the need to have accurate data, accurate calculations based upon factual real-time information, and then linking it back into an application landscape, which in many organizations is the Wild West, where people don't actually understand which applications are consuming which resources, where and when. So from a community perspective, we need to get together. We need to bring together all these disparate groups and get them talking. So we're talking a common language with a common standard, with a common calculation methodology. So there's going to be a lot more on this tomorrow. And there's a panel happening later on today, which is about, I think it's 4 o'clock-ish. So definitely come to that. So come back tomorrow for kind of more detail and clarity on where to start and what to do. We're having a chalk talk where we're going to be going through and answering a lot of the questions about where to go and where to do it. And the bit that we really want to talk about is why culture matters so much. Because culture with sustainability is a huge part of it, because it gives you that conversation that you might not be able to have about cost through a completely different lens with people who will want to make savings. And we're also going to be looking at the individual personas across the whole aspect of the organizations to work out who fits where and why it's relevant to FinOps. That's me done.
All right, great job, Mark. That was awesome. I love listening to Mark talk about sustainability. He's very well informed. And just to be clear, don't come back here tomorrow, but definitely go see him at the Speakeasy tomorrow. So I'd like to open it up for Q&A. Does anyone have questions for Mark? Yep.
Hi, thanks, Mark. It was a great speech. With the unit economics you were talking about from a carbon perspective, as the granularity of data increases and we're getting like hourly and potentially even more granular than that, can you see people moving towards like moving workloads based on carbon like throughout the day? So it's like if my carbon's peaking during like the evening, I can move it like follow the sun kind of thing.
So can I see them talking about doing it? Yes. I think there'll be some workloads where it will be possible, because what you going to have to take into account is the context of the impact of moving the workloads, the resource consumption and the risk, because organizations are very risk averse in what they do and how they do it. So I think there will be some where it will happen, and I think it's going to be more down to where you're placing new workloads, making those decisions there. And over time, having a period of going, right, actually every quarter or every 6 months, we're going to look and say, actually, we're moving it from there to there for these reasons, but understanding the cost and complexity impact of that.
Cool, thank you.
Hey, thanks. Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a quick question. Just for my understanding, like, do you think that once the data will be available broadly, like in some point of time, cloud providers might move their workloads to the countries with the less developed kind of a environment regulations, or it doesn't make sense in terms of geographical region where it's this carbon footprint was basically.
I think the cloud providers will do whatever it does to drive profit, because unfortunately they are generally profit before purpose. But the customers will drive that impact for them. I think so. The customer pressure is what's going to drive them to change. And what you already see is and on a very positive front, if you look at all the investments they've all made in more efficient data centers in region, like some of the newer ones in Sweden and things, and their investments in newer technologies that are more efficient. So it's not all doom and gloom from what they're doing. It's just that particularly the older providers, I don't know if I'd say Amazon are old, but yeah, some of the older providers with the older data centers, they have some pretty ugly, nasty, horrible infrastructure running in their core data centers still. And that's one of the reasons why they have this problem.
But from the environment perspective, like, does it make sense is it important in which region the workload is located, or it's like kind of a globally affecting everyone?
It's globally affecting everyone, but yes, it does impact regionally as well. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I think we have a question in the back. Yeah, I don't need the mic. I need you to use the mic because we're recording the session. So. Yeah. There you go.
So what incentives do cloud providers have if they're only covering scope 1 and scope 2 to then additionally provide scope 3? And how can we influence that?
So legislation is one of the things that's influencing them. Exposure and embarrassment is another one. And the fact that, like anything with them, when one of them does it, the other two will suddenly run into doing it because they feel like they're missing out. Because Microsoft at the moment are light years ahead in many ways in what they're doing and how they're doing it. And you watch the other two will play catch up when they realize there's revenue at risk. That's what will change their behavior.
Okay, thank you.
Would you have time for one more? Yeah, one more question. Dean?
What's your view on baselining the on-premise application emissions and using it as a positive spin on migration to cloud? Do you think that methodology is far off? Do you think it's something that
I think the way the way the cloud vendors are doing it today is horribly ugly, and they're using made-up figures, and they don't hold any semblance of reality whatsoever. I've gone through them loads and loads of times, and I hate it. I hate them with a passion. It's just ugly and nasty. If they did it properly, I'd support it, but they're not doing it properly. They're using incorrect information. They're using wild assumptions that are hugely in their favor. They compare the ugliest of data centers and platforms with data they don't have versus the most efficient region they've ever had, run in the most efficient way. So if you were doing it properly, yes, it is a thing people want to do. Because all large organizations, they want to understand the footprint across their entire ecosystem, and they want to make that decision based upon real facts. But at the moment, the cloud providers are not helping in the way they're approaching it, because they lose credibility when people look at the figures.
Thank you.
Thanks. Round of applause for Mark. That was a great talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.